Hi, this is Henk. Welcome to another edition of the Soul Sessions podcast. And today my guest is Gina Linnell Shaefer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's delve a little bit into what you've got going on, Gina.
Do you like scary stuff? I,
I
I
don't know if
write
that's a trick question or not. Yeah.
I write paranormal horror and thrillers. I'm the author of the Titty Hall series, which is probably one of my biggest sellers. The 13th Hour. I've got Sharon's Last Call that's out there. That's got a little bit of religion in there, and then I've got the Pied Piper's Print. Which what makes that one interesting is it's loosely based off the true serial killer that was here in the Houston area. In fact, the term that got coined serial killer is after this dude, Dean Corll.
When was that term coined?
In the night in 1973, technically, because that was when the case actually happened. What had happened was this man, he was torturing young boys. And it was shortly before the Gacy case, but he would kidnap and torture young boys, and he actually got two teenage accomplices. He was going to torture and kill them, but he liked them. And so what he'd do is he'd pay them $200 a pop if they bring over a friend so that he could do these really evil, vile things. I mean, we're talking glass tubes of penises where you smash them with a hammer. He would tie them to boards. It was a horrific case in the 70s. It made national news, and they were digging up bodies.
So did the kids know that they were subjecting these people for the $200 to torture and killing and maiming and all that?
Absolutely. That's what's so evil makes it even so worse. I mean, they were bringing him people that they went to school with, that they were theoretically friends with.
Wow. So when the case came to light, were they accused? Were they sentenced?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they spent the rest of their lives in jail. What had happened on August 8th, 19, I believe it was 1973, yes, because we just had the 50-year reunion. And Wayne, there was David Brooks and there was Wayne Henley. Those were his two accomplices. And they had actually, the night before, he had lured his friend and a female friend that actually angered Coral to the core, because he did not like girls, he did not like women, did not want her there. And Wayne was like, please don't kill her. I had no place to bring her. She was homeless. And so he actually he ordered him to rape her, and then he tortured and was doing these horrific things to these other
No,
boys.
he ordered one of the kids to rape her.
Oh yes, oh yes.
How old were the kids?
I believe Brooks was 16 or 15 at the time, and I think Henley was 17. Brooks died of COVID recently in the Huntsville prison. I believe Henley is still there trying to sell his art. He was a little bit too happy about the book.
Isn't there a law that like you can't make money off your art if you're convicted of something? Like I think John Wayne Gacy
Yes.
sold some of his art to like Axl Rose, and like there was there's some drama about that. Like even though it wasn't direct sales, like his estate might get money, and that's not good.
Yes, Henley is trying to do the same thing. His art is awful, so I can't imagine. I think you've got all these people that got morbid curiosities, and they will.
Well, John Wayne Gacy's art wasn't that great either. So like
Yeah.
I like I'm an artist. I'm like, oh my god! But it's like what sells is whatever is the name behind it, not necessarily whether it's good or not.
Exactly. It's just, people have that morbid because, those are weird websites. Like you could buy so-and-so fingernails and stuff like that. It's like, how do you know?
Right.
In fact, when I was doing my research on the case, Dean Corll was actually buried, because what had happened, the story happened was Dean had turned on Wayne, and he freaked out. He got his gun and he shot him dead. And that's how, this all unmasked. And then Wayne started bragging about it, because he's like, well, we killed more than Gacy did. And he started telling him where all the burial spots were. And, but it's like, he was like, Brooks was like, very he felt bad. He was just worried. He was scared not to help him. But Henley just kind of wanted to profit off of it. He's almost very egotistic. Every once in a while, when like one of the victims' families will pass away, or the house was still available for a long time, that all of this happened. They just recently tore it down. But uh, they would go, the news crews would go to Huntsville and they'd interview Henley, and he would be bragging about it. He shows absolutely no remorse.
Wow. So who is the main guy, the main serial killer who recruited
Dean
the?
Arnold Quarrel.
Okay.
Now, my book, it's the crimes are based off of what he did, and I do give acknowledgments in the book about the victims. But I did do it as it's kind of like historical fiction, paranormal, because it takes place in 3 different eras. Because the house was still available on Lamar Street forever until they just recently turned it. They actually knocked it down this past February or March or something like that. But I have the book taking place where the ghost of one of his victims is telling the story. And then there's a reporter that's living there in 2003. And then she goes in between the veil where she meets with the ghost and she sees all the horrors of the crimes that's happening with the case.
Wow. So what drew you to this case to write a story about it?
Just because the boys were not really just acknowledged about it. I always do a lot of research. I had written the 13th Hour a few years ago, and in the 13th Hour, my main character Merritt, she actually travels through time to some of her past lives, and unfortunately, her past lives were entailed with a lot of serial killers. And I came across Dean Quarrel for a couple of reasons. His case was familiar. My husband, who just recently passed away, he actually lived in the area where Dean Quarrel would hunt for his victims. And so he knew some of them. The house is not that far away. He became known as the Candyman. And because he was known as the Candyman and the Pied Piper, became known as the Candyman because his mother owned a candy factory in the Heights area. And then when it shut down, he went to work for HL&P, which was Houston Light and Power before Centerpoint took over. And I drew an interest in the case because it involved kids. And it's really, to me, it was very telling of the fact that he got 2 of teenage accomplices, and I was really disgusted at the fact that he got them to bring over their friends. Now, Brooks actually tried to tell his mom what was going on, but she didn't believe him.
How long did he wait before trying to tell his mom?
He kept leaving her notes and things like that. And she just went, and he tried to talk to her a few times. And what had happened was his mom was kept marrying all these different people, and he didn't get along with the people in the house. So he actually thought Quarrel was his friend for a while, and he went and lived with Quarrel for a while because the mom was friends with him. And on the outside, just like any other particular serial killer, he seemed like this clean-cut, nice guy that was always willing to help. And come to find out that he was really there was a demon stuck inside of him or something.
Right. Have you seen other stuff like the West Memphis 3, like where like there's all sorts of accusations? I'm not saying that there are definitely serial killers, because there definitely are, but there's also like people that get like sucked in, like the local like mentality is like, oh well, look, they're in the middle or they're into this, they're different than us, so they should be evil.
This wasn't the case with this guy. Nobody thought he was evil. I mean, it's like there are people that are misjudged just because it's like, remember in the 80s, especially when goth was so big, and somebody, oh my goodness, somebody wore that. Well, they must be Satan worshippers, and they can be really nice people. What makes Quarrel so ordinary is, or his case so, vivid, is because he seems so ordinary. And people protected him. But yeah, there's people all the time that are getting accused of things that they haven't done. But in this case, nobody claimed innocent. And of course, Quarrel could never speak for himself because he was shot dead.
Right. So was he The kids, were they pretty normal as well?
I don't think David was. I think they appeared to be normal, but obviously, if they're pulling in their friends to have them
Well,
killed,
I'm not saying the same Holly was normal, but I mean, did they appear normal? They didn't look like,
they they appeared normal, especially Henley because he's very, very outgoing. But he also got some sort of, he probably really wasn't because he got some sort of inside joy. Like he would go out and hang missing posters and things like that and try to help the families and go visit the families and
so
go as
yeah,
far.
he was a little bit, he was a little bit of a narcissist, a little bit like fucked up.
Yeah. Oh, he was. And this is what he really did that just after he would, he would be trying to help a family, he would bring a younger brother or another brother that was related to a brother. So he'd bring family members over to the house where they were killed so they could get killed too. And so you had parents that didn't just lose one child, they lost multiple children.
How many people were killed in total?
They believe the body count was 28. Henley claims that there is more. Now, Henley also, he's very arrogant. And so the Casey case was going on as well. And because Gacy was saying that there was more than 30 kids, I think that's why he was
Oh, the
saying there was more.
competition. Yeah.
Yeah, like literally like there was competition because he was laughing in the courtroom. David Brooks was hiding his face. He was trying to get away because David Brooks had gotten his girlfriend pregnant and he was going to try to marry her and get away from a quarrel, but he could not get away.
So, what was the one who died in prison?
David Brooks, he died of COVID.
Okay.
And I think that was like 2 years ago.
Okay. How old was he when he died?
I'd have to, let's see.
He was like an old man, though.
Let me see. He would have been, say, in 1970s. Oh, let's see, 1977. He would have been 17. So he'd been born in 60. He would have been born in 60. So he's probably in his late 50s, early 60s.
Wow. And his pregnant girlfriend long since abandoned him.
Well, obviously he went to jail. He tried to keep contact with his daughter, but unfortunately his daughter died before he died, because she died coming home from her senior prom. So that family had a lot of had a lot of tragedy in it.
Wait, what did she die of?
She died in a car accident
Wow.
coming home from senior prom.
Yeah. Wow. And was that? That was early on. He just like kind of evolves after that.
I don't know how his life was like in jail. I know though that he had a really sad life beforehand, which is why he was drawn to Coral to begin with.
Yeah. So is that kind of your focus, like in writing, like you focus on serial killers?
It just my focus it goes. I tell people I have mental stigmata. I sat on an authors panel just last weekend, and they're like, all these authors were telling them about their storyboards and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I just sit at my computer and whatever comes out, and then I fix it later. Usually it does have to do with, it's all paranormal, supernatural paranormal. So, like Tinny Hall, it wasn't a serial killer. It was about a pastor who did murder his girlfriend. But the main and the protagonist in that story is actually an autistic, mute, an autistic mute girl that's also a clairvoyant who has a group of friends that she's able to communicate with. And her father was the pastor at the church, so it's having an affair with a young girl, but he was also a snake handler. And I got to throw in that Texas twist. There's a lot of Texas in that, and it was supposed to be a standalone book, but I was getting so many. I mean, at first it was just my friends that were reading it until I finally started doing book signings and getting out there, and then I was getting so much from other people. So when I wrote the sequel, Titty Hall: The Possession, which that is scarier than anything because my goal in life is to make Stephen King look like a pussy.
Yeah.
And according to my friends, I did that with Possession. And so now they're demanding another one, which I'm in the process of writing something else now. But when I get done writing that, then I'll come up with a third one, and then I'm like, okay, we gotta be done. I'll do some more Texas stories, and I'll have things take place in Texas, but we got to give Titty Hall a rest for a while.
Why is Texas a focus? You live in
That's where
Texas
I
now?
live.
Okay.
That's where I live. And one thing about Texas is, and this is like why some people in Hollywood are wanting to start filming in Texas. So we have every geographic region you can imagine. We've got the hill country, we've got the flatlands, we've got the coast, we've got the swamp, we've got the piney woods. And so you've got every geographic location, and the cultures are different within the different areas of Texas. My
Oh, no,
favorite
I lived in Austin for 3 years, and Austin is way different than like Dallas or
yes,
Houston.
hill country, and Austin is a beautiful place. It's hill country, but I like how the cultures are different throughout the areas, and it does make for some very interesting characterization. I also sometimes seep into Louisiana, which also I can bring in some of that Creole cultural, which I like, and it's what I know. And people, I can get into a lot of detail. I also do a lot of my paranormal investigations in Texas. Usually, if I'm just doing a paranormal investigation for fun, it's when I'm traveling. But when I get called out to houses or to help people, it's always going to be Texas based because that's where I'm at.
There's a like I like Texas interesting, and it's a cool variation to like not see like a lot of stuff takes place on like the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Like New York, New Jersey. It's kind of cool to see like down south. And like you mentioned Louisiana, I love stuff in Louisiana because there's so much atmosphere with the whole like swamps and like
Yeah,
I don't know if you've seen the movie The Appreciate Jones, where they're all hiding in the swamps, and you kind of like there's all this atmosphere that you don't get.
exactly. And that's what I like is I like that mystical type of atmosphere. In fact, the book that I'm currently working on now, it takes place around the Sabine River area that eases into Louisiana. And because there's this area, it's interesting because you've got the piney woods, and the piney woods will all of a sudden kind of seep into a swamp area. So there's like an area where they actually blend together.
Oh, it's
And so
cool,
you
yeah.
also have the different culturals. Now, also, the beginning of the book takes place in 1937, so I do write a lot of dated pieces as well, which is why I have to do so much research. But it's an excuse to travel and go see the areas.
Well, there's nothing wrong with research. Like I
Yeah.
just saw the Loch Ness, so I was like, I got to go see Loch Ness.
Yes, absolutely.
And like I think that some people are like, yeah, I never do research. Like, well, I can tell.
Yeah.
Like when people do research, like you learn like little cool like ticks and trace and whatever of that area, and they're like, I didn't know that, or that's unique, and you obviously you would not get that if you didn't, if you weren't familiar with the territory and the category that you're working with.
I agree. And even though it's like paranormal, sci-fi, fantasy, elements of what's actually in that area is very helpful. I remember when I read, of course, this is literary nonfiction, but when I read The Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, I thought it was a great book. I liked it. Then I go to Savannah, and I've been to Savannah several times, and all of a sudden the book becomes magical. People like to be able to connect to something. And if you have something real, it's just even like in the 13th hour, all the serial killers that my character comes across, they are real. So even though it's, would be considered that supernatural field, it does seep into historical fiction because I am talking about real, actual things that happen. Just like Pied Piper's Prince, I changed his name in the book, but people know who he is, and especially people in this area. So that's why this book is pretty, like in the area I live in, the LaPorte area, it's pretty big. Especially like, when August 8th hit, I had so many orders on my website for that book just because, it happened right here. I've had people stop. I was at an art studio doing book signing, and I had somebody stop and buy Tinny Hall just because, like, about Tinny Hall? And I'm like, yeah, it's in East Texas, but it's a speck on the map and it's real. And like in the possession, City Hall, the possession. There's also it takes place in the Piney Woods in Crockett. It takes place in White House, Texas. It takes place in Jefferson, Texas, and Coushatta, Louisiana. Not the casino, but the tiny town, and in Jasper. And then, of course, there's some pieces in Houston. It's all very rich in history. And people like that. They like to be able to open it up and read it and say, you know what, I've been there. I've seen that. Or they'll go back and research something. I know in one of my books, one of my students read 13th Hour, and there was a psychic in Chicago. And well, she claimed to be a psychic. Women would come to her about their cheating husbands, and she'd give them some brownies, and she would predict that they would die. And she'd say, "Now, don't you eat these brownies, but make sure you get some life insurance on your clients." And the brownies would kill them. And then they thought she was some great psychic, but she was a serial killer. She was killing her husband. She also killed all her husbands. In fact, in real life, she actually, when she married her last husband, she had a coffin that was in the basement of the apartment that they lived in. She's like, well, you're probably going to die soon. I can predict that. So that way, I'm ready for you. And this is a real person. And it does draw people to do the research themselves and to look into these things and to be aware. And it's comical, it's sad and crazy, but there is some humor into it too. If you're sick like me.
I think like all those like unique traits of like actual cases helps bring it to life, because a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people, when they like make up a story and they're just everything's out of their head, like it doesn't grab people because it doesn't have that element of realism to it. Like the element of realism will show you like specific areas when you mention like road signs or streets or whatever. Is if you haven't been there, you're like, wow, it's like a deep dive into the area. If you're there, you're like, hey, I live next to that street. So yeah, it helps pull you in.
Yeah, and it's also helps to have like beta readers. Like I'll have no, my husband was a police officer, so especially when it like dealt with weapons and things like that. I mean, he was one of my beta readers, so he could like any inconsistencies, and or I would go and ask him, it's like, hey, is it realistic for this gun to kill somebody at this short range, or what kind of damage, or would they be able to survive? And then like I have a teacher friend in Connecticut, and I'll send him a digital copy of the book before. So I send out my books to the different people that can.
No, I think that's great to bring experts in. Like my dad's big on guns. He has a FFL. He has literally 1,000 guns. Like he reloads himself. He goes hunting every weekend. But one thing that really bugs him is when people get firearms wrong in movies. Like, it'll be like a 6-shot revolver. They'll shoot like 20 shots, or it'll be like right next to the head and they're not deaf. Or like instead of like holding out like this, they're like this, and they may have to hit the target. Yeah, there are a bunch of mistakes. It's people need to do the research.
And I think dialect is really important too, because I put a lot of dialogue. And I know there was one book I had given to a student. It was a really long book, and I mean, the book had some great elements in it, but there was also pieces that took place in Texas, particularly near the Dallas area. And the author had the dialect wrong. They don't talk like that there.
Oh, right, yeah.
They talk. He had them kind of talking more like how they would talk in Lower East Texas, and
it just takes that one thing to like throw you out. Like, yes, like you're reading. Like I was reading. Sorry to interrupt, but I was reading like a Punisher comic book, and like. Punisher is at the range and he fires, and you see the bullet traveling with the cartridge and the primer still on it towards the target. And I was like, all right, I'm done.
Yeah. And I get like that. I get like that with movies. Like I'll be watching something that's supposed to be dated, and then I'll see like a light on. Or like I remember I was watching some version of Lizzie Borden, which I thought was really good. But in the background, they're using an electric iron. I'm like, they didn't have electricity then. I'm done. I stopped watching the series. I'm done. They screwed up. That didn't exist back then. Right. And I mean, and I think that's what happens from having a large history knowledge, because I am a huge history buff. But I want there. As even though I'm writing all this paranormal stuff, and sci-fi, and I know a lot of people don't believe in it, but I do want those realistic elements, and I want very colorful characters that are real. when you have a book full of stagnant characters, it's okay to have one, but when the whole book is full of stagnant characters, I mean, come on. It's like, I don't even want to read
I
it.
mean, maybe one for a contrast, but
Yes.
I was gonna say something about the whole like paranormal, spiritual realm is like, see, I'm an atheist, but that doesn't mean that there's not all sorts of stuff that we can't explain going on. Like people, they find like you know 100 million-year-old creatures all the time. They find weird connections with the quantum theory. They find there's all sorts of weird stuff. There like might be multiple dimensions. There might be like different planes of reality. So yeah, I think all that stuff, if it's well done, can draw you in, even if you're like not personally into that.
Exactly. And sometimes people aren't. I know, like, my husband was never into that until I started taking him places and reading it. And all of a sudden, he found an interest into it. We don't know if we're into something unless we explore it. And so that's why it's like, oh, don't always, never be afraid to try new things. It's just, like Roswell. Let's go visit Roswell. Let's go do some investigation.
And now the government says they have aliens. For
Yeah,
the longest time, it's like, conspiracy theory. And they're like, oh, by the way, don't look over in the corner. We started another war, but check out the aliens. Like whenever the government has a find, they're trying to hide something.
exactly. Absolutely. And then what happens is makes people like me want to go on a treasure hunt to find out what it is.
Well, the thing is, like, I have no doubt that there are aliens. I mean, who knows exactly the source or where they came from or what's going on? But, I think it's just a mathematical probability. But for the longest time, like I said, the government, they'll grab stuff and they'll hide it. They're like, this is conspiracy stuff. Nobody should talk about this. Like, no, people should talk about everything. It doesn't mean you
Absolutely.
believe everything, but you should talk about everything.
Exactly, because the thing is what that does is that gain knowledge. And I think it's even more important now than ever before because we've got this disease of AI happening, and people relying on AI, this artificial intelligence, and only certain things are fed into that. And people are not thinking for themselves. And the more that they explore, the more they ask questions and they talk about stuff.
What
And then,
was it? It was like I think it was a university in Boston where like they had two really advanced computers. And they started communicating with each other in like some language that they didn't know what was going on. So they turned them both off. They're like, "Fuck this."
yeah, and yeah, it's happening all over. Yeah. And that might be one case that you're aware of, but I can guarantee you it's happening in other colleges and places.
Skynet, Terminator, Skynet. We're done for. But
Yeah.
all right, so tell me how people can see your stuff. Tell me how many books you have out. Do you have a website, an Amazon author page?
I do have a website, GinaLynnell.com. It's GinaLynnelle.com. And I have my 5 books that are on there and a preview for the new book that I'm currently writing. But what they can also see on my website are book trailers because I'm a big believer because I like visuals.
I
And
like book
so
trailers. Yeah, I don't know if they sell a lot, but I love them.
they do, for especially for younger people, but I will tell you because I go to a lot. In fact, next weekend I'm going to a market days. Last week I was at Nerdcon, and what I'll do is I'll have my computer out and I'll be
Is that
playing
what it's called?
trailers.
Nerdcon?
Yes. Oh, it was so much fun. There were so many aliens around there and Star Trek people. I even had R2D2. I posted it on Instagram. This guy was a robotics dude. He created R2D2.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, it was
Yeah,
so much
my
fun.
girl always tells me, she's like, "You're such a nerd," because like I'm all covered in tattoos. She's like, "It's a facade. It's a facade. You're a nerd." I'm like,
And
okay, whatever.
you
Nerds are
know
cool
what?
now.
Yeah, it's cool now, and I don't care. I mean, it's like, whatever, because I'll tell you, I sold so many books there. But what I also did though, and because I noticed that a lot of other authors weren't selling the books I was doing. Now, grant you, I did sit on the authors panel, but when people would walk by my booth, I would have my computer open and they would see the trailers playing, and they could hear it, and it would capture
Oh,
their
that's a good
attention.
idea. Yeah.
And that
I'm
was,
gonna
I feel
steal
like,
that the next Author Fest I go to. Like
yeah.
I'll have my iPad and I'll be playing like trailers for my books.
Yes, it's really, it's great, and you can get them done. I mean, I know like some publishers and stuff, they'll say, "Oh, we'll make one for you for $500 and stuff." I get mine done by some dude on Fiverr, and he does fantastic cinematic, trailers that, I mean, that they're just really impressive. So people don't have to spend a lot of money for those.
Yeah, well, I have a guy. He also does my book covers, Elliptic, and he does great trailers. And yeah, it might cost you $400, but it looks like he spent $1,000 on it.
Yes,
I'm like,
yes.
okay, that was worth it because it's like that makes me want to buy the book.
Exactly. And for people, because more and more, because I know when people do approach my table and they're looking, before, because sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, she's anti. And it's interesting because a lot of times people think that they see like the demons and stuff on my book and they think it's anti God. And that is not the case at all. In fact, there is a lot of faith based
That's
images.
probably way more of an issue down in Texas than it is here. Like
Exactly.
in New York, like nobody would care, but in Texas, it might be like, well, I remember my parents were like, when I first got in the middle, it's like, oh, you're into Satanism. It's like, if I don't believe in God, I don't believe in Satan. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like leave you alone, let you find yourself in what you believe in.
Right.
And I am very heavy in my faith, and I'm Catholic and I'm proud of it. I celebrate the holidays. And if you read like my books, yes, there is a lot of evil demonic things that are happening in the books. However, good always, good will persevere where good comes through. In fact, some of my antagonists that helped one of my lead characters in the possession, they're archangels, but there is that judgment that people will think, or like my next book, written about witches and things like that. Oh, this is all bad. This is evil. No, it's not. You just know nothing about it.
Right.
And so sometimes the trailers do help kind of disperse from that. But I also have to realize that there are people that are not going to question. They're not going to explore. They're not going to learn. So when people come to my booth, I'll ask them, hey, what do you like to read? Now, I'm not a romance writer, can't write romance. I mean, I might have like a touch of it here or there, but it's basically, yeah, they had wild
You're gonna
sex.
have
It's
Fabio on your covers,
yeah, no, it's like, hell no, give me somebody that, can fix a car. Don't give me somebody with long hair. I'll chop it off. And no man's allowed to have hair longer than mine. Mine's pretty damn long. But I do have, those different elements in there. It does sometimes scare people off, but then they need to read throughout the entire book. And when I say that, I even have personal friends that like, I'm sorry, I can't get through your book. You have, too many demons in there, or, some shit like that. And I was like, okay, whatever, to each is your
yeah,
own.
but if that's your religion, don't they have demons in that religion?
Absolutely. I mean, if it wasn't for I mean, come on. Every scare, there's an exorcism, there's something going on. Who are you going to call when you're going to call
Well,
the priest?
even like my parents are very religious, and like the original incarnation of angels is not like the fluffy pretty thing you see. Like
No.
they're terrifying.
Oh yes, I did have somebody get very angry with me when I said that Lucifer was an angel, and I'm like,
Well, he is, according to the mythology. If you buy the mythology at all, he is the angel of light.
yes, and so that's why he's called Morning Star.
Yeah.
And so I do have that issue where some people, they're very judgmental with that, especially in my area. But then once some people read my book, because I'll have a conversation with them, and I try to draw them in. What was the last book that you read? Because a lot of times people just flat out say they don't read, which is why a trailer is really good. Or what I'll do is I'll say randomly open the book and read a paragraph. And I've had a few people do that, and they're like, I'm buying this book. And but it was a matter of drawing them into conversation. So what I also do is to kind of gather more people to my booth. It's like also like little crystals and necklaces and things like that, just little trinkets. my real goal, of course, is to sell books. And
To
so they'll be
draw
drawn
the
to that.
man.
Yeah, they'll be drawn to that. And I'm like, okay, so you're sitting there telling me that I'm this evil, horrible person, but you're buying these chakra necklaces, or, how about I just do a tarot card reading on you right here? I'm a paranormal investigator. I've seen a lot of weird shit. So,
Yeah, people love to be Karen sometimes.
yeah,
You know, I think at a certain point you just have to develop a thick skin and be like, okay, all right, man, go on with your like petty little life. Leave me
yes,
alone.
yeah. And I mean, I guess it took me a while to get this, and grant you, I teach English, and so it took me a while, to get this, but I actually feel sorry for people who don't read, especially if they don't have the ability to travel, because you read something that you like, it's going to open up your minds. It's even when I'm sitting down with somebody, it's like, okay, you don't read. Tell me what was the last television show you liked that you really liked.
Yeah, it
And
amazes me when people are like, "Yeah, I don't read." I'm like, what? like,
yes,
how do you make it through high school? Although this is why Japan is beating us, and Nigeria is beating us, and India is beating us, is because they read.
exactly, exactly. And I mean, read something you like, read something, and read something that's going to take you away from from the world that you're in right now. Because let's face it, the world sucks right now. Everything's expensive.
It just gives you
Um,
a broader perspective. Like you,
yes,
you, you kind of know how to deal with stuff. You're not like constantly going, oh wow, I can't deal. Oh wow, yeah,
you know, and so I mean, and reading makes better writers. It's just like, like I said at the author panel, there were authors, and I'm sure they were, I have not read their books, I'm sure they were great, maybe, but they're like, oh, you can watch YouTube videos, you can, take these classes to learn how to write. I do think it's a natural born gift, because I sit down in front of my computer and I write, and I know that I sold more books than the other authors because I let the imagination flow.
right. Well, it's also I think the ones that like you see the people that are like they actually have a talent and they're inspired. But like Neil Gaiman's a big fan of his stuff. Richard Matheson, who are I Am Legend, but you can tell that they're like natural born storytellers. So
Yes.
it's not like they took like a YouTube video online class and then were like, okay, I now I master this stuff. No, they worked at the craft. And like Neil Gaiman, when he started out, like I met him years ago when he was doing Sandman, and he was good, but he wasn't great. And I think he's just gotten better and better
We
through
do.
repetition and working on his craft.
And we do, working on your craft. You get better. But the thing is it doesn't mean, because your books are going to get better. They're going to get more polished. But that doesn't mean that the stories that you had in your earlier days were bad. It's just you're practicing, you're perfecting that craft, like you were saying. It's kind of like, how some people get better with age. Well, they start taking care of themselves better. Of
Yeah.
course, tell that to my own
That's a good
stuff.
point. Yeah, and like often when people's early stuff, like I actually one of those people like I like bands' first albums. I like people's early stuff because like
Yeah.
it might be a little more raw, but it has great inspiration, great ideas. Or like that inspired them enough to put it out to the public.
Mm-hmm.
And like later on, they're like, yeah, people just buy my stuff, and they'll like come up with an idea. They're like, okay, well, that's good enough. But
Yes.
it felt like they really worked on that early craft.
The great tragedy of is, and I know people need it in order to get famous, but it's like with publishers and agents and literary stuff that want you to change their stuff and hone in to what they think is going to work, but it doesn't necessarily work for you. So you have to be careful with that. You have to be able to put your foot down with that. And sometimes their earlier stuff is better because they didn't have that influence saying, well, you need to do this or you need to do that. And it doesn't sound natural.
Like
I
this is
know.
what sells. You have to incorporate this.
Exactly. And it was like, I know one of my friends' complaints with Titty Hall is a couple of my characters, they cuss like sailors, but that is their personality. They are East Texas cops. And yes, MF is coming out every other word, and dickhole and all of these other things that are coming out that sound horrible and crude, but that's building the character. And it's like I'm trying to tell somebody, well, that's not really me cussing, that's my character cussing. And
Well, I
because
remember reading some review on I think Amazon like a horror anthology, and they're like, you don't need to curse. Like they gave it like a 2-star review because there was cursing in it. You know?
yeah, and that's not fair because it's character development. Because there are other characters in my books that never say a bad word
Right.
because it's part of their personality. And it was just like, earlier talking about being from New York, and this is where you're from, and here where I'm from. It's all a part of our personalities. And that's what creates those great, wonderful characters within books. I mean, any people that don't read, if they think of some of the fantastic characters they liked on television, like J.R. Ewing,
Yeah. Well,
fantastic villain. You
if
know,
you're like presenting a Southern gentleman, and he talks like a New Yorker, nobody buys it, or vice
no,
versa. If it's a New Yorker and he talks like a Southern gentleman, it's like that element of realism really helps bring it to life. Like I think
exactly.
that's Stephen King's strongest point is like how realistic his characters are.
And it makes them stand out because I know, because I love to travel. I met, and like when I go to New York, or I mean Chicago or any place, and they hear me, where are you from? And
Right.
they're automatically interested, and then we'll start talking, and we'll start going back and forth, and hearing these different things. And then that also helps me because I bring that back, because that's one thing about anytime you talk to a writer, you got to be careful because anything you say may end up in a book. And if they piss you off and they're a horror writer, well, then they might kill you off in a book. A friend of mine insisted that I included him in some of my books. And he's in Titney Hall, The Possession, and he's actually one of my beta readers. And when I send him the copy, before I start reading this, do I make it out alive? Yes, I mean, he does make it out alive. But the thing is, I don't know if he's going to make it out alive on the next one because I haven't written it yet. And I don't know if he's going to make it out until I write it.
Well, that's good to have that. Like, do you you said like more like you sit down and like you come up with the ideas. So like I didn't know this term until I started interviewing other writers, but there's something called a pantser where people like they work by the seat of their pants and they just come up with stuff. And like I write extensive notes and I plan everything out, but I know not everyone works that way. So
No,
what's your process?
my process is I will develop an idea and I'll write it on a board because I like always have several ideas, but I just write like with the titles. The titles are always the first that comes to me. I may a storyline may come to me as I'm sleeping or as I'm driving, and so I sit down to write. But I honestly do not know what's going to come out until it comes out. And that's why I made the joke, and I tell people I have mental stigmata because I really honestly do not know how it's going to come out. And I think that, I mean, if I did make an outline, it probably, I wouldn't follow it anyways, because it flows through. So I write the book in its entirety. Then I go back and I reread it, partly for consistency, make sure I'm still spelling the name right, make sure that it makes sense. Like for example, I know when I wrote Sharon's Last Call, I interchanged maybe like Johnny Walker and Johnny Black or whatever for the alcohol because that takes place at a bar in hell. And then when I get it down and I've written it, then what I do is I'll actually put it into like KDP for Amazon because they do it really quick, and I'll make like 5 authors copies and I send them to my beta readers, and I have one as well. And I read it, and then we look for mistakes, we look for errors, and it doesn't always come out formatted right and everything. And then, and I did, was working with a publisher, but that just kind of that wasn't working out. So I told them I didn't want to work with them anymore. And so I put all of my stuff on Ingram Spark, but I have like this process. Everything gets written out, and it takes me, depending upon my time frame. The shortest time I've written a book is in about 7 months. My typical time for me to write is a year, only because I write because I have a full-time job. the end of this year, I do plan on retiring, and I'm going to focus more on writing. So hopefully, I'll get more of my books poured out. And once I have that book written, and then I go back and I reread, and then I put it into KDP. I give it to my beta readers. Then we go down and we actually sit down and do like a line by line, page by page, and we will compare notes. And again, it's not just for like grammar and spelling and things like that. It's also for consistency. And then once I have that, then I make sure that it's properly formatted. I always pretty much have an idea of a cover design. I'll usually try to hire somebody to do the cover design. I don't recommend using free images off the internet because you can't. A lot of people do that, and that can get you in trouble. I don't care if they say it's free. You can't just mass distribute that. So
Well,
I'll get
if
a
it's
license.
free on the internet, probably other people are using it as well.
Exactly. So it's stupid. And and so that's, in fact, that was an issue I had with my last publisher. He was like, "Oh, but it's like, no, you don't do that." So I'll come up with, try to get a pretty good design that I like, that I want to stand out. And then I will, as far as the trailer goes, because I hate when people are like, "So what's your book about?" I'm like, it's so much easier just to say, "Here, watch this trailer." So I'll get an idea of a trailer, and then I'll send it off and I'll get it done. And then, like I'll plan a little launch. I don't do anything big. I like the last time I went to a bar and I said, "Hey, I'm an author. Do I have to?" And they didn't even charge me to rent. Like, yeah, you can sit in the corner and sell books here. That's fine. And they even
That's
gave me free
awesome.
drinks
Yeah.
all night. And so, and I sold quite a few.
It's probably way more of a Texas thing than it is a New York thing. Like New York,
Well,
they want to charge you for everything.
yeah, that's for well, it is can be expensive if you use a formal venue, but a formal venue you also have to have a large invite list.
Right.
The reason why, because the last launch party I did was for Sharon's last call, and there was a place called the Voodoo Hut in Kima, and the thing is it Sharon's last call, the people that are in this realm of hell, they're actually in a coma, and it hasn't been determined if they're going to live or die. So they cross the Ingrid waters to Sharon, who's the ferryman, but he's the bartender, and they reflect on their really horrid, pathetic, horrible lives. And we go through the seven sins, and then it determines they pull a slot machine. They either get to live, die, or they get a choice. And I have the Latin words, morbis, vita, virtue, and then Sharon doesn't know if they're going to heaven or hell until they pull, and then he takes them to their destination.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. It sounds like an interesting take. It's like I don't know why, but like well, I know why. Like they immediately like find a couple like tropes that they like, and they just beat it to death. Like
Yes.
like okay, that was the plot of The Walking Dead. We'll make 5 copies roughly of The Walking Dead. People are like, but I came up with an original, totally different zombie story. They're like, yeah, but it's not a proven seller. The Walking Dead sells. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I don't get is like, I mean, some things that, like you said, they beat them into the ground. I mean, look at the NCIS series or CIS series or that. I mean, now they have, now they have it in Australia. And I mean, people need to come up with more, creative ideas. I used to laugh when they would, make movies like when they made Beverly Hillbillies movies and the Brady Bunch movies. And I'm like, okay, yeah, they're definitely running out of ideas here.
Well, I think Hollywood runs out of ideas all the time, and
Oh, yeah.
then they hire like authors, and like we'll take a chance, and then it blows up big.
Oh yeah, and they will, but they'll only pay the author like a tiny little bit of money, but it's
Oh
so
yeah, yeah.
hard to get there and to get that attention. And so they look at your following and they look, and it's just, hopefully when I retire, I'll be able to do a whole lot more and get a lot more out there. But at least now I am getting, some good reviews on the books.
Well, good for you. So, all right. So, tell everybody how they can see your stuff. It's all available on Amazon.
And so anything where you can buy online bookstore. In fact, if you go to my website, it will, and you click on the order now. It usually, I think most of them take you to the Barnes and Noble website. But you can get them at bookshop.org. You can get them any type of online. Amazon, they're there and have an author's page on Amazon. And of course, I guess I'm a capitalist because I love Amazon. I buy everything. It's like why you go to the store these
I
days.
buy way too much off Amazon. It's like it's just so easy. You go in there, you're like, oh, I need a dishwasher dispenser. Boom, you know.
Exactly. And I'm actually looking at moving, here in the next year. So I started collecting my Amazon boxes. I have a tower in my living room. Like it's a joke. It's my Amazon box tower. And it's like you need a box here because they have pretty good boxes. Of course, now they're using those little white plastic things too. So
I ever seen that. I've mainly seen like the Prime boxes with like the blue tape on it,
yes.
But all right, so why do you mainly sell on Barnes and Nobles? Is like do you use I know there are different formats, like there's Amazon KDP, there's Draft to Digital, which like his Barnes and Nobles and all the Kindles.
Actually, what I do is, and you can purchase them anywhere, and I do EPUB books as well. I upload all my books to the Ingram Spark website, and they're the ones that distribute because they will distribute everywhere. And so that's why I like them so much because when you use Amazon, it's just Amazon, and that's what I started off doing until because it's like you perfect your craft, but you also learn little details along the way. I did Barnes and Noble. I switch it out every once in a while because I see who's giving the best deal on it. Even though I set the prices, certain places will give cheaper prices just for whatever reason. But also, to get their attention, maybe, get in there for a book signing, even though right now, still in my area, they're still doing a lot of virtual events, even though COVID is really not a thing right now where I'm at.
So what's the is it a website, the Ingram something?
Ingram Spark is where you can publish your books, and I'll put them in the chat, but I'm going to put my website in the chat as well.
Okay, yeah, no, I'll post up a link to your website and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But Ingram Spark is it a service that you pay for? Is it a service you enroll in?
Well, you build an account, and lately they have not charged me to set up my books, but they will charge to convert it into an ebook book. Now, if you have to make revisions, they'll charge you for that. And then, but they do a really nice job, and they ship pretty quickly. And you can give them what release date that you want for the book, and they're just if you're not good at building books, they have a book builder in there. And so it's a great, all of your bigger publishers, the top 5, yeah, they publish, they do the editing and stuff like that, but they're putting it on Ingram Spark because they're really a distribution area.
Oh wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's something everyone should check out, I think.
absolutely. And I'm putting it in the chat as well so that you can look it up.
Okay, yeah, no, I'll definitely look it up. All right, so thank you for being on here. Do you have anything else that you want to tell everybody about to have them check out?
Be safe, stay open, and read.
Definitely read. Yeah,
Yes.
we're getting super. That might help if you read a little bit. But yeah, thank you very much for being on here.
Anytime.